All right, everybody, welcome back to the Millennial Sales Podcast. This is episode 267, Wednesday, December 15th, halfway through the last month of the year. This is the show where young salespeople come to learn about the craft of sales, up-level their career, make more money, get a great job, whatever it is that you're here after. This is the show to come for it. I'm your host, Tommy Tahoe. Pumped, y'all. I am a good combination of excited and very nervous for how the end of the year is going to play out here the last 2 weeks, as I'm sure a lot of you are too. So sending my best wishes, my positive vibes, my good sales karma all over wherever you are in the world, trying to close some of those last year deals and get yourself ready mentally and physically for 2022 and big shit popping off for that. God, we got a great episode. I wanted to save one of the better ones that I've done in the last few months for a week like this where, you might be under a little extra tension. You might be a little stressed. Shit may or may not go your way depending on where you are in certain deals and what happens outside of your control. So I really am excited about this episode. I've got Nikki Ivey. Let's talk about her for a second. So Nikki has been in sales in different capacities for over a decade now. Started in car sales, got into software, sold a bunch of different things, been a leader. She's right now working at Cultured Perspectives, and she is the head of growth development over there. She's a co-founder of the SDR Defenders, which was acquired by Pavilion and Revenue Collective as a community to kind of back up the SDRs. And she was recently named a LinkedIn top 10 voice in sales. So of all the people talking about sales on LinkedIn, yours truly included, 10 were picked. I was not picked. She was picked as one of the 10. So she's one of the biggest names in sales, 21,000 followers on LinkedIn, sales, career, culture, all those different things wrapped into one. We had a great conversation. We talk about how she got into sales and why, talked about the great story of her getting, kind of like picked up from a car parking lot where she's selling cars to a new job into software and that kind of starting this new chapter in her life. Talk about the inspiration that her children give her to strive after her own dreams. God, we talk about how she's uplifting and taking her positive energy and charisma and attitude and knowledge, and instead of just finding the best paying job, is actually going to make an impact for minorities and women in sales and really making a difference there. So I have so much love and respect for Nikki. This is the first time, or one of the first times we've really chatted in depth, and it was such a great conversation. So I hope it gives you the boost. I hope it gets you fired up. I definitely recommend following her, checking her out, keeping an eye on everything that she's doing. She has some big things coming in the new year. We got 2 words for you, or 2 quick messages for you before we get to the actual podcast. So bear with me. First, would love if wherever you're listening to this podcast, you subscribe and leave a review. If it's Apple, Spotify, YouTube, that's what really helps to grow this show, is hitting subscribe so you can make sure that the next episode comes to you directly, and leaving a review if it's on Apple. It should take you a minute. It makes a huge difference to me. I appreciate everything that you as the community is doing for me and for this show. You can definitely follow me on LinkedIn, Tom Malemo. I'm posting every single day on sales. And then I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, the OG sponsors of this podcast, Postal.io. Postal helps create curated marketing experiences and sales experiences. So you can send, whether it's a Starbucks gift card, wine, flowers from the local florist. You can create events for your prospects. So you get your top 10 customers all together for a beer tasting or something like that. They're changing the game. And in a world where we're not meeting people on site either at all or not very much, it's a great way to build those relationships digitally, which is only going to become more important. So check them out at postal.io. Check me out on LinkedIn and hit the subscribe button. And without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Nikki Ivey. Let's go. All right. Welcome to the Millennial Sales Podcast. Nikki, Ivey. Good morning, Nikki. How are you?
Good morning, Tom. I'm doing well.
You, as we said before we got started, you woke up on the right side of the bed. You're feeling good today.
I did. So I live in Florida. Most of the time the sun is shining, and that is the source from which I siphon my cheeriness. But today it's gray, so the sunshine has to come from within. You feel me?
I do. And I have to say, for the people that aren't watching this on YouTube, you've got a really strong background, like Zoom background. You know, you've got the Michelle Obama, the Glennon Doyle, the LinkedIn top voices, like, you know, a little bit of a flex there. The sales hat, which I think is bravada. I mean, it's like, that's a legit setup right there.
I mean, sometimes you got to know what it's acting like. No, but no, and we can get into that later. But look, right, there are really sort of fun, lighthearted reasons why this exists, right? It's so that this is what I look for when I'm talking to someone. Typically in a seller buyer situation, I'm always like looking at, and you just did a really wonderful job just now shouting out these things. But yeah, I'm looking at what common ground can I find in what they've got back there, or what can I compliment them on? And so part of it is that, but the other part of it, Tom, is there's not very many Black women in this business. And there is often a narrative that precedes Black women that is, first of all, obviously inaccurate often, but also, you know, it can put us in a situation where, you know, we have to take this extra mile to prove ourselves, right? The expertise is questioned. And so these are just me answering these questions in case somebody got a question. That's it.
It's like, yeah, you kind of you handle the objection before the objection comes up. You know what I'm saying?
I go full beat rabbit, right? It's full 8 Mile. Oh, you thought? I already know.
It's funny. I was actually thinking about that, but I was like, am I really going to drop an 8 Mile reference like 1 minute into this podcast? So I'm glad you beat me to it. That's where we're at today.
This is how I know it's going to be a great conversation.
Oh man, we've got so much to talk about, and we had a good conversation a month or two ago on this other project that I'm working on. I got to know you a little bit better, so I'm excited to share more publicly your story with the audience and all of the wisdom and experience that you've accumulated. So I'd love to take it back to the start of your sales career, and maybe you could just walk me through the story of how you got into sales.
Okay, it's 2 stories. Both involve car lots. Walk with me. So I'll talk about how I got into sales proper, right? And then I'll talk about how I got into B2B sales, because they're actually interconnected. So how I got into sales, generally speaking, I had a friend and she was looking to buy a car, and I accompanied her on this journey to buy a vehicle. And we went to this used car lot. There's this salesperson. He's like super schmoozy, and he's like super, I don't know, canned, I guess. It looked like he had watched a video on how to car salesmen, and he took all the notes, which is bad. So anyway, you feel it. All of us have felt like this discomfort when you can see like sort of the seams of someone, right? Like, I get that you're saying these things because someone told you they'd be effective, but is there a human in there anywhere that I could speak to? So I spent the time trying to get this guy to break his veneer, right? Because I could see my friend sort of like, she wanted to buy a vehicle, but she was like drawing into herself because something about this person's approach was, you know, again, canned, rehearsed, robotic. And so I was actually trying to help him, but it came off like I was heckling him, I'm sure. And he was just like, man, I could see him. He's going over to the desk. He's talking to his manager, and he's like, I think I got the buyer on the hook, but this person she brought with her is like throwing a wrench and everything. So anyway, he was unable to break veneer, and my friend did not walk out with a car, but his manager chased me out the door and offered me a job.
Really?
Yeah. He was like, you got something, kid. And I didn't know, like, I've always loved words. I've always been a person who understood sort of the power of, what you say and how you say it to move someone. It's what I connected with. One of the persons I connected with as a very small child. And so, I had that, and I guess that's what this guy was identifying, but I didn't actually know that I had gumption, right? I thought everybody was just, pulling up and saying how they feel. But this guy's fervor sort of clued me in. I was like 20 years old at the time.
Okay.
21 maybe. Anyway, so did I just date myself? Perhaps. Anyway, so that's
what were you doing at the time?
Shoot, waitressing.
Okay.
I was a waitress at a pool hall called Doodles in a small town. Yeah, isn't it? So I grew up a military brat. Some people know that. Fort Stewart, Georgia is around where this took place. Hinesville is sort of the small town that is adjacent to that Army base. Hinesville, if you're from there, is how you pronounce it. But anyway, so that's where all this took place. I get this car sales job. I start to understand, like I said, hey, I'm moving people. But there was something kind of like icky, right? Because like I said, I'm coming into this as a communicator. I'm coming into this as a connector of people. But that wasn't the assignment at this particular job, right? I would have I had this manager who'd constantly be like, someone's walking onto the lot. He'd be like, you got to see that as, that new purse you want to buy. You got to see that as, that jewelry you want. And I'm like, first of all, I would sooner buy a ticket to Puerto Rico on the beach than I would, a purse. So you don't know me. But anyway, but also, right, he's asking me to see people as not people. And that's where the icky part came in. So I go back to college. I actually do end up studying communication, journalism, broadcasting, and all of these, and sharpening these communication skills, but still end up going back to car sales.
The same place?
No. Okay. I've moved different at this point. Okay. So fast forward, I am in Austin, Texas, and I am selling cars at Kia. I was slanging them whips, as we like to call it. And I was on a test drive with this guy, and we had such a fun time. And we get to the end of it, and he's like, so you were here all day last Saturday when I came to look at cars. You've been here with me all day this Saturday, right? And you've been talking. I know you're here all the time. Like, did you know that with your skill set, you could work in the air conditioning? No, he was like, you could actually sell what I sell, right? You could sell software. Have you ever thought about that? And I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing you could get paid for, right? It makes sense now. Like, of course, somebody has to sell it. But at the time, I had no idea. And he's like, yeah, you should meet my boss. We're hiring. And so his boss ends up being Scott Leese. The company is a company called Outbound Engine. They were since, I believe, acquired by GoDaddy. But anyway, I walk into this place. It's sort of a cattle call interview. I don't know if they even still do these anymore, but they did this a lot on the B2B, the burgeoning B2B tech scene in Austin around 2014, 2015. And I stood out and I get the interview. And people are like, you should be scared. Scott Leese is mean. He makes salespeople cry. So I was like, how am I going to nail this? What can I do? This is, again, I've never spoken to this person before. He's still actually building his brand and his career at the time. So it wasn't like it was ubiquitous, right? And anybody who's in B2B sales knows who this person is. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Which I want him to hear that. I didn't know who you were, Scott. You weren't that important. Anyway, I'm just kidding. I should give him a hard time.
Lose the ego, Scott.
I know. Can you just take it down a notch? At any rate, so I decide that I'm gonna figure out how to stand out. So they had told us, he did this podcast. You should go listen to it so you can speak intelligently. Blah blah blah. So I did all those things, but I was like, let me see what his Twitter is talking about. So I go on Scott Leese's Twitter again before ever having a conversation with him. And it's almost all like the ups and downs emotionally of being a San Francisco Giants fan and other like sports stuff that he's interested in. And I found things that we had in common, right? We both watched, I think, ESPN 30 for 30. So in the interview, I found a place to bring this up, right? So we end up talking about everybody hates Christian Laettner. I'm giving him a hard time for being a Giants fan. He's giving me a hard time for being a Yankees fan. And we're doing the thing that I've always craved, this human connection. I hadn't experienced it in a job interview before. I hadn't experienced it with a leader before. But again, it was just sort of like reassurance, reaffirming this idea of what I think I always knew sales could be, right? Which is absent that veneer, bringing your entire self to it, and really sort of compelling people to listen and have open hearts and open minds. And look, maybe, we agree at the end of the day that we should work together. Maybe we don't. But this conversation wasn't empty for either one of us. And so that's how I got into it. I learned quite a bit. I did end up going back to sell cards once again after that. It's fun, y'all. But anyway, so that's how I got into it. And, I guess the rest is not quite history because I'm still like here and whatnot.
So how was it? You obviously got the job.
Yes.
What was it like working for him? As I didn't know that was his reputation in 2014 as the leader that made sales reps cry. I didn't know that happened.
Well, it's sometimes it's good and bad. I'll tell you this. I cried in my interview, but it wasn't because he was mean to me. I cried in my interview because he asked these really piercing questions about, like, but why are you here really? Right? Like, why is it, I hear you saying that you want to be able to have more time with your family, and car sales isn't conducive to that. Great. I hear you saying that you want to make more money. Get it. Great. But why are all of those things important? And, my answer to the question, it surprised me that I cried. I would always think that if I did, I would probably not get the job. Right. But I think maybe it was the vulnerability for him. At any rate, so I start to answer this question, and I'm telling him this story, true story of a time when I'd gone to pick my kids up from school, and my little boy was like, "Can we get an ice cream cone at McDonald's?" And I didn't have the 50 cents to buy my child an ice cream cone. He would ask me things like, hey, I want to sign up for soccer. I want to do this. I want to do that. And I just I wasn't in a place where I was gainfully employed enough to be able to get those things for him. And it's not even things, it's experiences this little boy is asking me for. Experiences that my parents got from me and that I believe were enriching, but I was in such a tough and painful place. And I'm thinking he could tell. Right? He cared to see it. And clearly that stuck with me. It's why we're still friends. But working with him was constantly, just because of it takes me a long time to like learn things when it comes to like treating myself well. But that was a lot of the sort of coaching that he would do with me. It was like, Nikki, I can see that, you got a few no's before lunch. And then after lunch, the activity is plummeting, right? Or after lunch, I can hear that, you sound a little bit defeated. What's going on? And I was like, well, I did bad. And I'm mad at myself for doing bad. And he's like, we don't like do that here. He's like, it's not productive to punish yourself for things not going your way, right? For the outcome. As long as you did what you were supposed to do, leading up to whatever this outcome is, like, it's just not productive. And I hadn't, like, folks had tried to tell me that before, but I was hearing it more as, don't pretend like you don't have emotions about losing. That's how I was hearing it before, right? What Scott was telling me was, of course you have those emotions, channel them into this other direction. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Red Dawn with Patrick Swayze. If you haven't, there's this line where everybody is sad. You're so young, you probably, of course not. But there's this line where everybody's sad because something tragic happened. I won't spoil it for you, but the line is, let it turn into something else. And so Scott was encouraging me to let the hurt, the pain of this rejection to turn into something else. And a lot of the time I was able to do that. And so again, I learned a lot there. And I'd say those are the things, right? Is being, having it demonstrated how to productively embrace the ups and downs in a sales environment. And he did a really, really good job. I guess 3 things. So there was that. There was, I still haven't met a person who writes a more sort of engaging and effective sales script than the ones I learned from when I was working with Scott. And there's a culture of training in this place. We were all full cycle reps. A lot of us were just folks that walked in off the street and never sold a thing in our lives when it came to software. But the training was so the focus of that team and of that culture. And everybody was in on it, that I think it was probably the best possible foundation I could have had coming into B2B tech sales. And, a lot of folks don't know because I was only there for like 3 months before I, was like, I don't know, and went back to car sales before I ended up getting my life and going back to B2B tech sales once and for all.
Yeah. I think, first of all, in 263 episodes, no one's ever brought up Patrick Swayze on this podcast. I can guarantee you. So yes. If that's all we're going to take away from this conversation, we've got that. But I think, I love the story of you sitting down with Scott the first time you meet him and him getting to that level within you and trying to understand, like, what is your motivation? Like, what's bringing you here? And what's really kind of like deep seated. And I remember when we talked a month or two ago, you were talking about your ambitions and you were talking about, being a mother, and that I'm paraphrasing you, but so you can correct me where I'm wrong. But you said, if I shrink my dreams, all I'm doing is teaching my kids to shrink their dreams. I'd love for you to talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah. And that's something that I have to think about and be intentional about on a regular basis. Other moms will know this, or really anybody that's been on the other side of it that wasn't a mom themselves, but been a young person trying to, pursue a dream and having, adults in your life or leaders in your life tell you that your dream is not practical enough. I have faced a lot of adversity in my life. I have faced a lot of failure in my life. And that makes it incredibly difficult to dream again at all, because there's such a risk involved in that. And so it's one of the reasons I left Outbound Engine so quickly. I was like, this isn't like, I can see other people winning here. I can see me winning here, but is it really going to be all it's cracked up to be? Am I really going to be able to get this sort of stratospheric success? Or do I just want to go back and do the easy thing, which is charm people in person and have fun driving cars and sell this tangible thing? And then I found, or I sort of came to realize through my relationship with my oldest son, that is what he was learning. We were at, my whole family, I have 4 kids and a husband, and we were at Waffle House one night, and we're having fun, right? We always have fun. We're a fun family. But we were hella poor. And so but my kids didn't know that. So my son was like, he looked at me and he was like, how much money do you have to make a year, Mom, to be able to have just this right here? Right? Be able to I can go out, I can take my kids to get something to eat. We can have our little, crappy apartment, but everybody's happy. Right? And so on the one hand, it was heartwarming because he was recognizing that what we do have with each other is valuable. But on the other hand, it was really, really painful because he's telling me that he can see that we're just getting by. He's telling me that he can see that we have just enough. And he's asking me, Mom, he's telling me he aspires to that just enough. That's what I was teaching him at that point, right? You got just enough, be happy with that. And, just keep grinding it out and sticking it out paycheck to paycheck for the rest of your life. And I didn't know that I was doing that until he mentioned that to me. And so from that point, I just pretty much felt an imperative to, if I didn't at the time have the money to make these kids' dreams come true, right, then I had to have the drive. I had to be able to demonstrate it. And again, that's something I have to stay intentional about. As my son has gotten older, he's a musician, he's an artist, he has all of these sort of non-standard, non-beaten path aspirations and interests. And at the same time, he's charming like his mama. So what I've been handsome kid too. Anyways,
I
so if I do say so myself. But is he the only one that looks like me? Sure, not a coincidence. But anyway, so
Oh my
so
God.
so my instinct, because I saw the things in him that were making me successful as a salesperson, I was like, you need to do this, right? And I can help you get a job as an SDR. You'll make phone calls for a year or two, and then you'll do this. And all I wanted was for him to be able to have a steady income, for him to be able to take care of himself, for him to have access to that sort of transformative wealth that a successful salesperson can have. But what he had to reiterate this to me, like, that is your own dream. And for me, what your dream is feels practical, feels too practical. And so, he's like just asking me, maybe not for permission, but I could see that he wanted my blessing to go his own way. And, as difficult as it was, because of how much I believe in the power of a sales career to change someone's life, I had to let him do that. And what I was talking about when you and I spoke a couple months ago was this idea that when you are young, when you are, however young you feel really, but certainly before you have a family, before you have other folks depending on you, there is no more appropriate time to follow your dreams. There's no more appropriate time to just get in there and mess some stuff up and fail a little bit. You know what I'm saying? As long as, of course, you're not hurting anybody, you're not committing crimes, right? You're not like knocking over candy stores or whatever.
Yeah.
But some people, I guess that is their dream.
Whose dream is knocking over candy stores?
I don't know. A toddler that really wants a lollipop. No idea. But anyway, so it's like the kid's not hurting anybody. He's doing something that he wants. I might as well just like embrace that, empower that, encourage that. And now he is in just such a great place. He's happy. He's spiritually fulfilled. And it's one of the things that continues to, inspire me on a daily basis.
I love that. We talked about at the beginning your background, literal background behind you of some of the different pieces. And obviously looking over your left shoulder is that LinkedIn Top Voices honoree from last year. And just for people that aren't familiar, you correct me where I'm wrong, but in all of LinkedIn, of all of the, I don't even know, thousands, tens of thousands of people that are creating content specifically around sales, last year you were picked as one of the 10, right? It's 10?
It's 10.
The 10 top voices. God, that's amazing. As for someone that just got into sales, you just got into B2B sales, you said what, 2014, 2015?
Yep.
It's like your 5th or 6th year in sales. To get that recognition, what did that mean to you?
I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel like vindication. I mentioned before that, I was only at Outbound Ninja for 3 months. I've certainly had my share of failures, right? Where I felt like I failed myself. I felt like I failed my kids. I failed my leaders who had, believed in me. And that was a lot to claw myself back from. You add to that the fact that the voices that had been emerging or that had been sort of, revered as the sources of truth, the subject matter experts in this space, they didn't look like me. So I wasn't really like, there was no guarantee. There was nothing really in front of me that was telling me that something like being recognized as, the top voice in anything was possible. So it was a surprise. Again, it felt like vindication. It felt like, okay, I'm on the right path. I'm not an imposter, which is something that I do struggle with sometimes. And also it felt like a little bit of pressure, but then I let it turn into something else. I let the pressure turn into, motivation. So, and listen, this is not like I made that decision one day that this pressure is motivation and I never feel the pressure again. But where the pressure came from was, okay, so now there are people paying attention to what I say. And there's a responsibility that comes with that, particularly as it pertains to younger or newer sales folks coming into the profession, right? Am I saying things that are going to, genuinely help these people on their way? Am I saying things that are effectively disruptive to a lot of the other things that are already being said? And so this felt like, yes, you are. Because what I know, and you and I talked about this offline, what I know I wasn't really talking about in terms of, being a sales voice is, like you said, I don't really do tactics a lot of the time. I'll talk about strategy. Mostly though, I talk about culture. So that was the biggest takeaway for me. That's what felt like the biggest win about being a top voice, was that I did it with a level of authenticity, right? I did it talking about the parts of sales that connect with me the most, and that I didn't have to be someone else, right? I'm not going to be, these are people who I love and respect, right? Kyle Coleman, who I built SDR Defenders with, he's giving you all the tactics, and I think he's the best at it, to be honest, right? So he's showing you, this is how you write an email that's effective. And he's showing you, this is how you support your SDR team as a leader. And I think all of that is really important, but he got that, right? He's doing that really well. Plenty, Christina Finseth, Will Allred, like there are folks out there who are doing a really, really good job of teaching folks how to do effective sales messaging. And so the fact to be recognized for doing something so different, and for connecting with people and helping folks take better care of ourselves and treat ourselves better as salespeople, it was really special.
You mentioned you've said the word culture probably a half dozen times so far. I know that's something that's, one of the things that's near and dear to your heart that you work on, that you talk about on LinkedIn, but you also have a consulting company where I think you're working with other companies on helping to kind of create that culture. I think you say like where the culture meets career, or like that corner. So could you talk a little bit about where we are from a sales culture? I feel like there's been a lot going on, obviously last year with COVID, with Black Lives Matter, with it felt like the world was getting turned upside down. And now we've got like the Great Resignation going on. So like from your perspective of just where you kind of see the sales tech world, like where are we right now in terms of culture? Like, have we made any headway? I'm sure we still have a lot of gaps places. I'd love to hear you kind of just talk about that and what you're seeing out there.
I think we have made progress, and I'll start with, the mental health piece, right? That's probably a place where I'm seeing some of the more surprising strides, because, as I alluded to before, this idea of, leave your feelings at the door. This idea of, what does it mean to detach from the outcome without detaching from your own very real and very valid feelings that come up in a sales career, good and bad. And so I think that we're in this place right now where salespeople are feeling a permission and, best case is an imperative to refuse to be just another brick in the wall. Because before, I believe that before the pandemic was in full swing, before we were sort of challenged to do so, we were in real danger of sort of over-engineering the sales profession, right? A lot of folks contend that we are still over-engineering the sales process with the preponderance of tech that's out there to enable this. I'm not really so hard on the use of tech, but when it comes to, what is the value of an entry-level salesperson? What is the value of, an SDR? That wasn't coming from the top often, right? There were folks who were getting it right, few and far between, but we were being taught as salespeople to put ourselves and our real emotions and feelings, not just second, third, or fourth, but to pretend again that they didn't even exist. And for a lot of us, it was the only way to cope, right? If I stop for a second and think about how this rejection makes me feel, if I stop for a second and think about how it feels to have, my hard work overlooked because my title is SDR and not AE, then who would even stay in the profession, right? If that is, there isn't some other supporting system coming underneath. And what happened when we saw sales folks let go in droves during the pandemic was these communities started to come up, and that became that support system. It became, this groundswell where folks are like, you know what? I'm not the only one who feels sad sometimes when the rejection happens too many times in a row, right? When the quota is missed too many times in a row, these existential crises, we've all done it, right? I've certainly boiled myself down to my quota. Someone asked me, Nikki, how are you doing? Just how are you doing? I can't answer that question without it being about my quota. Well, I'm pacing the goal or I'm not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm 150% of quota. I guess that means I'm doing great.
Right.
And, I had to have my family. My husband would be like, that's not what I asked you. Know? But we were doing that to ourselves. And then these communities came up and encouraged us to stop doing that. And I think that has a lot to do with, why we're not going to take it. Why, why the salespeople have refused, to accept that as a status quo. And then you have organizations like Uncrushed, which I'm a member of the board, as we're going to have a podcast coming out pretty soon. It's going to be so fun. It's going to be salespeople talking about just this, right? They're going to be salespeople talking about how they approach mental health in a sales career, the impact of mental health on a sales career. At any rate, that part I think we are making significant progress in. You mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's real implications in the sales world, because and I won't get into it too much, but unfortunately it looked like we got to a place where folks sort of knew, right? If you've been on the sales floor, you've been in a B2B tech company, and you are white, male and straight, it was mostly y'all, right? It was your colleagues were mostly white, male, straight people, but no action was being taken then. That felt like, I don't know how it was supposed to be, how it would always be, because we couldn't do anything about it. But with the sort of fervor and the refusal to take it after, in the wake of the death of George Floyd, it wasn't possible to do that anymore, right? Because that was being directly challenged, right? How long have you been in this profession as a leader and let it be okay with you that you did not have anywhere near a diverse team? How long have you been in a position of hiring salespeople, that is ushering people into this profession, that you weren't intentional about making sure that access to this profession was as democratized as possible? The answer for most people is the whole time, right? And so where we are right now, with that being challenged directly with communities like Sales for the Culture, which I'm also on the board of, which is
you're busy,
girl. No, it's a community. We're about 1,000 Black sellers. Functions almost like an external ERG, right? Because you have a bunch of people who are in sort of spread around the world. We're global. There are folks in, Galem's part of it, right? Of course, she's in the UK. We have a bunch of folks in the UK, folks in Canada, folks in other parts of Europe, India, all these things. But so those folks, though, we're still one of the only or one of few in their environments. And so now we're all together, and sometimes it can be like a sanity check, right? Like, this thing happened or was said or was done, and I feel like it was a little microaggressive, but maybe up to, but when we all get together, it's like, no, actually, there are iterations of this happening to sales folks of color all over the world, and now we have this solidarity, and we're also about that skill up. So, things like this are, I think, what's going to be our way out or way in, however you see it, into the future of sales. That is one that includes all of us, right? That is one that intentionally invites all of us into this profession. And so I do think sales culture, again, I actually think we're farther along with the mental health stuff. But when it comes to, diversity in sales, we've got a long, long, long way to go. But at least we're not asleep anymore.
Mm. It feels like to me, what I see is that there's companies that, talk about the message of having diverse, companies or diverse sales teams even, and talk about mental health. That's important. Here's what we do for mental health and wellness at the company. And then when I talk to leaders at those companies, it's not always consistent. And so I think if I'm speaking to someone that's, maybe considering a new company and any or all of these factors are important to them, I'm curious on your take, but I would advise them to look past what's on the company website into that leader. I was talking to a leader, or I was part of a conversation where there was a leader talking about his team and saying, yeah, we really care about, the things that we're talking about. And the person asked, okay, well, what's the makeup of your team? It's like, okay, well, there's 12 guys and 2 girls, and there's, 13 of them are white. And, I haven't taken a vacation in 3 years, so no one feels comfortable doing that. It's like the list kind of goes on, and it's like, okay, there's kind of like what you do speaks louder than what you say. And curious on your take on that, but I feel like if you're a CEO, there's a lot that you should be doing, but I would look personally at what that individual leader is doing, especially the sales leader for their own teams and what that looks like.
I agree wholeheartedly. Right. And that's part of the work I've been doing, like professionally, right, in the day jobs that I've taken on in this time frame that we're talking about, right, since the beginning of COVID. They've almost all worked in that space, right? That is, how do we make the workplace safer? How do we make the workplace mentally healthier and more diverse? And you're right. So what I'm encountering in this work is I'll go to a company's website. I'll see their diversity pledge, their we stand with, right, their pride logo. And then you're right. Often when I speak to the leaders therein, a lot of the time it's not so much that they're resistant to the idea of, of diverse sales floors. Sometimes it's that they just don't know the first step to take because they're afraid to mess up. But a lot of times it is complacency. Straight up. They don't have any strong feelings one way or the other. So they default to, well, what can I on paper prove ROI of to this board so that I hit my number? Like they're still in this little tunnel vision. And the irony though, right, is that what we know about how diverse teams perform versus those that are less diverse, what we know about how teams that talk openly about vulnerability, about mental health, is that those teams perform better than teams that don't. So in choosing to have this tunnel vision, in choosing to be afraid to take a step because what if it messes up everything I built here, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot. You're actually, alienating groups of people who could make your organization better. And so I actually don't quite know what it will take to unseat those folks, quite frankly, or to bring those folks along. I'm hoping that, the things that I'm doing with my time and things that other way more experienced, way, smarter people are doing toward this problem. But specific to sales, we have an imperative. I believe we're the people to make an impact on this, not just at our organizations, but in the world, because we are well practiced at making people believe in things, helping people see their role in whatever the future vision is, right? So I'm talking to a BDR manager. I'm trying to sell them a sales tool to help their team. I don't do that by belittling the fact that they haven't been doing this already. I don't do that by, talking too much about what I know about this product. I do that by saying, hey, I know you came here to make a difference with this team. I don't know yet if what I do can help you do that. But man, it sure did for this other person that I've been working with for a few months, right? And what I see when I met her, she was in exactly the same position that you're in, and it would just really, be exciting for me to be any small part of helping you get to that vision. This talk track, sure, it can sell gong, right? I don't even know if that's how they sell it. It's how I would sell. But anyway, this talk track,
you're hired.
Sell gong. This talk track could sell dually or whatever it is, right? And it could also sell proactive, inclusive leadership, including people in that future vision, showing them where they fit in, showing them that their role is critical. I think is how we get there. Encouraging folks, encouraging them to get beyond the ROI conversation. If we assume that anybody who is providing an inclusive and mentally healthy sales floor is going to be successful, then we don't have to ask those questions anymore, right? We don't have to worry about constantly telling folks, well, you'll make more money. Assume that that's the case. The way that you assume that it's the case that if you hire all white people, you'll be fine. You feel me? Because Tom, has anybody ever asked you, well, what's the ROI case for hiring more white, straight dudes out of college? No one's ever asked you that. You know why?
No.
Because the ROI is assumed. So if we get to that place with women and people of color and people from other underrepresented groups, again, then we can start to talk about, how we actually do this. What does this look like? What does this feel like on a day-to-day basis? And how are we actually supporting each other? I believe there are folks who want to do this. I meet them every day. They just need help. And I hope I could do that. One of the ways, I want to say this before we wrap up, is I have recently began working with a company called Inclusive, formerly Civic Dinners. And that is what we do, right? We come in and pick up where traditional diversity training leaves off, right? Traditional diversity training is going to be, I'm telling you, right, how to not get fired because you did or said something illegal to a coworker, or I'm telling you how to not be a jerk, how to not microaggress against folks, right? And you're just one to many absorbing that message. But what happens next, right? How do we understand whether or not all of that training has been put into a proper perspective? How do we know the impact that training had on me relative to my counterpart? And the only way that we know that is to have the uncomfortable conversation. So what Inclusive does is we go in and we help folks put structure around those conversations, and we help folks make these, again, what can be really uncomfortable conversations. We make them easy, we make them safe, and we teach folks how to do that so that the conversation can be ongoing. So again, I've thrown my whole life and profession into this stuff because I do believe in us as salespeople. Again, I believe in our ability to do better. I believe in our ability to help people understand complex things, and our ability to sell a vision, because that's what we do every day, especially at a startup. You walk through the door, someone's like, this product is going to save this industry and the world. And we're like, yeah. But then when the question is, can you make your neighbor feel more included? No, that sounds too hard. So let's just apply this skill set to this problem.
I want to acknowledge you for two things. I want to ask you a few rapid fire questions before we finalize. But before that, there's two things I got to say. One is that your energy level is vibrating at just like a high level. Like I talk to people all day long, podcasts, sales, you name it. And like you just go on a different level. I'm thinking over here, I'm like, I need to talk to Nikki more often. Like I'm fired up. And so I appreciate you bringing that to the table, which isn't always easy to do over Zoom. And then the second thing is that, it seems like you've understood over time, like what your kind of superpowers are, your master communicator, if nothing else. And there are probably easier things that you could do with that than what you're doing, right? There's maybe like easier money to be made of being like, a brick in the wall, as you'd say, as at a huge company and be a rep and just like, use your communication skills to sell software. But you're doing it to make a serious impact. And so I wanted to acknowledge you for that, because I think it's awesome.
Thank you.
We'll somehow segue from that to a couple rapid fire questions. before we let you go. So first, I see the 2 books. I see Untamed. I see Michelle Obama. There's a few others there that I can't make out. But we're big learners on this podcast, so I'm curious. Maybe it's those 2, but which books have been most impactful to you throughout your career? They could be, any genre is fair game, but just curious if anything comes to mind.
I'll tell you the first book that I was recommended, and I'll tell you the last one, most recent one that was impactful to me, and they actually kind of operate at polar ends of the sort of learning or philosophical spectrum. And I think the way I responded to this second one speaks to the growth I've had since I was introduced to the first one. So again, we talked about I was at Outbound Engine, and in this training class one day, at the part of the training where Scott Leese came in and sort of addressed this crowd right before we were going to be like unleashed onto the phones, and he talked about this book, 48 Laws of Power. Mm-hmm. And I know many people have read it, and it actually, though, when I started to read it, became really, really clear that I can't do leadership and I can't do, I guess, confidence in the same way that really anybody else can, but certainly in this, I can't be Scott Leese, right? I will never have the frame of reference. I will never have the way that sort of society and institutions engage with a Black woman as it differs from the way that those things engage with a white man, that would encourage me to see the way that, success and strategy is laid out in 48 Laws of Power, to be able to do it that same way. I can't. Mm-hmm. It's a fun book. It's entertaining. And at the time, I tried to fit myself into that box. Mm-hmm. I tried to fit myself into this. For those of you guys that don't know, it's just these different principles, but it can at points read like the art of war, right? A lot of the time it can be super aggressive, and it can be really like nobody else matters but you. And this is certainly just my interpretation of it. But at the time I tried for a couple years to put myself in that place mentally, put myself in that place emotionally. And it, flat out didn't work, right? But I would still say read the book, because it will help you find what kind of leader are you? What kind of salesperson are you? There are things about what I just mentioned, right, style-wise, that I do wish came more naturally to me. And if those things do come more naturally to you, then you might find yourself in that book in a more positive way, right? Yep. But I was so glad that I read it, because again, it helped me understand who I am and who I am not as a salesperson, as a communicator in general, right? Cut to this past year, I read The Motivation Myth. The Motivation Myth takes this idea of what drives people to do things and turns it on its head. Picture it, if you will. You're a salesperson, and you can't muster up, right, the energy to make one more fucking phone call. You just can't, right? What you would say is, I don't feel motivated. So I'm not motivated, so I can't do, is the existing paradigm, right? The flip is, when I do, I am motivated. So rather than waiting for the motivation to come that's going to spark me and put a fire under me to do something, I start to learn that when I do little things that make me feel like a winner, when I do little things that make me feel accomplished, that's where the motivation comes from. So sitting around and waiting to feel more motivated is counterproductive. And it sounds obvious as I'm saying it, but for me and for a lot of people that have sort of sat on the other side of me in a sales role, right? That feeling of, if I don't have it, I'm not feeling motivated today, I can't bring it, is real. So what that looks like in practice as a salesperson, is things like, I make a small goal of how many calls I want to make before noon, right? For me, it was always, I need 30 before noon, right? And when I accomplished that 30 before noon, it was so much more difficult for any no to hurt me, because I'm already a winner, right? Yeah. I'm motivated to keep going, because I know that getting through 30 cold calls before any time, right, can be difficult when it's this environment with a high volume, high rejection type situation. So I already know I won. And now when I go into it, let's say I get somebody that answers the phone, motivation. Somebody that answers the phone, I get through the intro, motivation. So it's about reframing, right? The idea of what a win is, letting yourself be open to the fact that sometimes the big win, right, it can be a letdown after the fact, right? So you want to get to President's Club, you've worked all of this time, and then President's Club happens, but that win, it's not lasting, it's fleeting. Mm-hmm. So even if I get it, I'm going to need something else the very next day, right, to put me back on the phone. That is, of course, if I don't let that win be the thing that motivates me to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So that's the book that I would recommend right now. That and Pursuit of Perfection, which has echoes of some of the same thing, but which sort of talks about going from being a perfectionist to from seeking perfection to seeking optimization, right? So am I doing everything and nothing goes wrong, or am I setting myself up to be optimized for things to go right? There's room for failure in that. There's room for nuance in that. There's room for learning in that. Whereas the pursuit of perfection sort of takes all of that away from you, and you're either the best or the worst, depending on how your day went.
I love it. I do not know. I have 48 Laws of Power. Haven't read it. I've tried to, but it's just kind of dense. The other two I haven't read.
Do the audiobook. The dude talking is like hella sinister, and it's like it's entertaining if nothing else.
Okay. So we've got time for I can give you two real quick questions. So first thing that comes to your mind, I got to know what's happening in the Nikki Ivey Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you listen to music. What's going on in the headphones?
Y'all gonna be mad. So I'm one of those people who starts playing Christmas music on November 1st.
Okay.
November. Right. It's what was happening in here right before we got on this call. Now, I have some discipline because I'm not a complete psychopath. And I do wait until after Thanksgiving to play Mariah Carey, All I Want for Christmas, right?
Yeah, okay.
We hold that one for the end. You feel me? Yeah. That's the finale. But right now, there's a lot of Ariana Grande Christmas and Chill. What? It's so fun. It's such a fun Christmas album. Obviously, Pentatonics, all of the Christmas stuff that gets on people's nerves who don't like Christmas music, but that makes me so very happy.
I love it. Last question for you. Who would you want to see on this podcast after you?
Ooh, I feel like the people I'm going to name have already been on here. So I'll skip those.
That's all right. We could get around to who's top in mind for you.
You've had Galem on the show.
I have.
Of course. Okay.
Love Galem.
There is a gentleman who I work with, who actually is the founder of Culture Perspective, the consultancy that I work at. And Marcus Knight is his name. Mm-hmm. Have you had Marcus Knight on the show?
No, I don't know Marcus.
Marcus is a friggin' star, right? He's got 3 successful exits under his belt. He's a super successful dude, and he's one of these people who right now in my life is, probably the strongest supporter, the strongest influence, because we met in Sales for the Culture, and he instantly saw something in me. But more than that, why you should have him on the show is not just because he believes in me, but because he's so smart as a leader. And what we do, right, in him forming Culture Perspective, I'll say this as fast as I can, because I know that we're at time. But he started Culture Perspective because he, like what I just described, in a sales career, very rarely saw sales expertise coming from Black people, right? You get assigned books, right? You start a job and they're like, hey, read 48 Laws of Power, or, read this book or that book. And most of the time, those books that you're recommended are by folks who do not look like you if you're a Black person. And so then you start to let this idea sink in over a career that sales expertise comes from white people. Sales expertise has a face, right? Yeah. We know that it doesn't, but that's what it started to feel like. And Marcus has taken that with Culture Perspective and turned it on its head. That's the energy we're bringing into the startups that we consult, is without even having to say anything, this is where sales expertise can come from. And that kind of expertise can propel your organization to the next level. So have him on the show. He will tell you hashtag all the things about sales leadership, sales culture, and how he's helping new salespeople win.
I love it. Nikki, this was great. My only regret, I wish we booked 90 minutes instead of 60. This is awesome. Before I let you go, definitely let people know the best place. I assume the best place to reach you is on LinkedIn, but if it's not, let everyone know the best place that they can hit you up with questions or if they want to connect with you.
You know what? LinkedIn is actually my LinkedIn inbox is a bit of a dumpster fire right now.
Yeah. Oof.
So I likely, if we're not already connected, I wouldn't really recommend that as a place to reach me. My Instagram.
Okay.
Don't nobody care about me on Instagram. These people do not know who I am. And so I would be flattered and excited to get messages on either Instagram or Twitter from folks listening to this, because again, those are places where I don't quite have the audience or the connections that I'd like to have, because I think it's a little bit more of an intimate and personal tone on those platforms.
What's your handle? Is it just Nikki Ivey?
Oh, you're right. It's no Nikki Ivey. So not no as in rejection, but as in get to know. So KNOW Nikki Ivey on both platforms, Instagram and Twitter at no Nikki Ivey.
I love it. Nikki, thanks for spending the time. This was great.
Thanks so much, Tom. It was so much fun.
Thanks for checking out that episode of the Millennial Sales Podcast. We're in the home stretch, November and December of 2021. Let's close this on a strong note. Please make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening here. It'll help me grow this show and provide better content for you. Otherwise, hit me up on LinkedIn, Tom Alemo. I'll see you there. Peace.